We saw a game against Arthur Feuerstein last week that ended in a fairly quick draw. So Arthur Feuerstein made National Master the same time Bobby did. He leapfrogged him a little bit here because he had such a good event in the Eastern States Open, Feuerstein did. Anyway, he starts with Retti's opening, named for Richard Reti. Reti lived from May 1889 to June 1929. He was Austro-Hungarian and then later Czechoslovakian. He was an author and composer of endgame studies. Some of his endgame studies were among the most famous endgame studies that are out there. Bobby with knight f6 and g3, the King's Indian attack. G6, the symmetrical defense. Bishop G2 and Bishop G7 is the kingside fianchetto variation. Both sides castle their kings, and after C4, we transpose to an English opening, and D6 is the great snake variation. And I have often said one of the greatest things about the great snake variation is its name. You know, when I was a kid, those are the kind of openings you wanted to play. The dragon, the great snake, anything with a name like that. D4 here is going to be another transposition. This is now transposed to a King's Indian defense, Oscar Pano's system, which is a sub-variation of the Yugoslav system. Oscar Pano is still alive. He was born March 17th, 1935, an Argentinian grandmaster, and he was the first world-class chess player born in South America. He won the championship of Argentina on several occasions, 3 or 4 times, I don't remember. I do remember his first title came when he was only 18 years old in 1953, and his last title came in 1992, and that's a span of 40 years, which is a great achievement when you consider the fact that he would have been playing against guys like Miguel Najdorf, Rafael, what was his last name, Sanguinetti, Miguel Quinteros, etc. Raul Sanguinetti. I think I said Rafael Sanguinetti. Raul Sanguinetti. Anyway, Oscar Pano's system. Now C5. Feuerstein playing H3. That's not the ECO. The book move is knight C3, which is ironically called the rare line. And I say ironically because it's the most frequently played move, so I don't know why it's so rare. And this transposes to a symmetrical variation of the English opening with knight c6. d5 is the advance line. Knight a5 is played from here, showing the most common book line right now, not what was played. Knight d2, a6 here. And now, speaking of Oscar Pano, Queen c2 is Pano's variation of the King's Indian defense, which is an offshoot of the Carlsbad variation. That line continues with rook b8, pawn b3, pawn b5, bishop b2, pawn takes c4, pawn takes the pawn on c4, and bishop h6. And that is Donner's line, named for Johann Donner. Johannes Hendrikus Donner was born July 6, 1927, passed away November 27, 1988. He was a Dutch grandmaster and a writer. Born in The Hague, he won the Dutch championship 3 different times, 1954, 57, and 1958 as well. That opening continues with pawn f4, pawn to e5, pawn takes the pawn en passant, bishop takes the pawn, knight to d5, rook takes the bishop on d2, queen takes the rook, and now bishop g7. And you can see black wants to take this knight with a discovered skewer. Let's go back. In the game, Feuerstein plays h3. Pawn takes the pawn. Knight takes the pawn. Knight c6. Interesting move. Isn't that super attacked? And only defended once. Well, he played e3. Let's talk about what happens if he captures the knight. Knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and bishop takes pawn. Hitting the rook, I will ignore the hit on my rook and discover a defense with tempo. Bishop takes h3. That hits his rook. And by the way, if he takes my rook, I'm not trading rooks right away. I'm taking the bishop because I'm threatening checkmate. So that gives me a nice little advantage. You have to stop my queen, and then I pick up the rook on the next turn. And this is favorable for black. He's got a development advantage, even though he's got an isolated pawn. His pieces are better situated. Let's go back. So that's why you don't see knight takes the knight. Now, here you saw that the bishop e3 is being recommended by the annotation bot. That is equal as you look at the eval bar. e3 moved up just like a splinter's hair. Now, pawn d5, Fischer. I wondered about getting my bishop out so I could put my rook here. Inaccurate. Bobby did find the best move according to the bot. Pawn takes the pawn, knight takes the pawn, knight takes the knight on c6. Bot calling for rook e1. I would think he'd want to get his pieces developed, so I would consider knight c3. Let's see what I get here. A check mark. That super attacks the knight on d4, so I'd have to defend, which creates some dark squared issues. I could just trade, that's true. Anyway, knight takes knight was played by Feuerstein. Pawn takes knight, now pawn e4. Knight b4. And Bobby would love to trade queens, removing the defender of the c2 square so that he could then attack the trapped rook. Feuerstein, not wanting that to occur, attacks the knight with his queen. And that gets a question mark. Instead, queen a4 recommended. Now rook b8, defends the knight, lines up with the queen. That gets a big red X with queen a5 being recommended. But the eval bar doesn't really drop that much on rook b8. Just a little bit. I wonder why it gets a red X instead of an inaccuracy. Anyway, the real threat that white has to worry about now is bishop e6. So that's a double question mark. Pawn to a3. The bot calling for knight c3. I thought that perhaps rook d1 would be a possible counter because it hits the queen, but I'm told that's a mistake. Maybe it's a mistake because now I can go ahead and go with that queen a5 move. Yeah, I get a star here. Anyway, a3 hits the knight. Bishop e6 ignores the hit on the knight and counterattacks. And for those who are newer to chess, a counterattack simply means attacking something bigger than he's attacking. So here, there's an attack on my knight. I could run away to make my knight safe, like knight a6, but even more better, which is absolutely proper grammar, is to get my bishop out of bed with tempo, counterattacking, attacking something of greater value than he has, of equal or greater value. So bishop e6, for that reason, gets the exclam. Queen a4, knight d3, knight c3. Knight takes b2, that is super attacked. The super attack is when one target is attacked by more than one piece. And of course, if you have more attackers than he has defenders, you can overpower. After bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop, and you're the one on the b2 square. Queen's rook to c1, queen to b6, creating a battery on the b file. Knight to d1 hits the rookie. Rook back to b5, safe and sound. Queen to c2, speaking of forming a battery. And rook to b3. Queen takes the c-man, queen takes the queen, rook takes the queen, and rook takes the pawn. Now rook to c7. Knight e3 is more reasonable and a better defense. Rook d8. Now knight e3 is played. Bishop d4. Knight d5. Bishop takes the knight. Pawn takes the bishop. King to f8, defending the e-man. Don't try to get cute with rook takes g3, saying, oh, I'll pick up that pawn, split your pawns because this pawn is pinned. Remember that it's when you try to get cute that things tend to get ugly. And here, white would play rook takes the e-man, and when you retreat your rook, so king f8 is the best. Now rook e1. Note that rook c4 would be answered by rook d3. And if bishop e4, then rook d2 maintains the defense. Rook e1 was the play, super attacking the e-man, and he'd love to get pigs on the 7th rank. For that reason, bishop f6 adds another defender to the e-man. Rook e2, pawn a5. And it is black who has the passed pawn, giving him an advantage. The principled move when your opponent has a passed pawn is to put your rook behind it. Rooks belong behind passed pawns. Whether you're the owner of the passed pawn, black too would like to get behind the passed pawn, although he has got to beware of that bishop. But white should play rook a7 here. Instead, he played king h2. Oh, the bot says pawn h4 was the move. What does the bot think of my move? A thumbs up. Rook a1. Now rook a7. Pawn a4. Black should play... black should play bishop d4, hitting the rook. And then... Where do you go? I guess rook c7 is your best bet here. But, can you take the pawn? So if you go to c7, it gives me a star. He's got that pawn super attacked. If you take, it's inaccurate. Oh, I know why it's inaccurate. Yeah, this also attacks this pawn, and the rook on e2 is overworked. You cannot take my bishop with your rook without me being able to take this rook. Anyway, a4 by Bobby Fischer. Bishop f3. Yeah, rook e4 was worth a try. Rook d6. Now rook e4. Rook takes the d-man. Pigs on the 7th. That gets an X. That just emphasizes what I've told you many, many times before. Pawns in enemy territory, particularly passed pawns, are worth more than pawns that have not moved. And so when you cross into enemy territory, that goes from being a 1-point pawn to a 2-point pawn to a 4-point pawn to a 6-point pawn. And if it gets here, it turns into a 9-point pawn, also called a queen. So... much more valuable is the passed pawn, but I can see the desire to get pigs on the 7th. The biggest problem is this dark squared bishop. There's a bishop there, guys. And he does take. After bishop takes the rook, a3, rook a8 check, king g7, rook a7, rook d1, counterattacking. Bishop f3. By the way, obviously, rook takes bishop is answered by rook takes bishop. And after rook a7, I come right back here to defend. Bishop f3, hitting my rook. Rook e1, defending. Now, you might be tempted to play rook d2. I don't think that's going to work. It gets a blunder. And the idea says, okay, go ahead and take my bishop, because I'll fork your king and your bishop, but no, he can block, which means he can just take that. And the funny thing is, at worst, this is still showing as a draw for black. All right, rook e1, king g2, bishop c5 now, rook a4, rook c1, and he wants to get up here, no doubt, and super attack that pawn. So bishop e4 prevents that. King f6, a lot of inaccuracies and mistakes coming up now. And that was move 40. f4, king e6, rook a6 check, king e7. Rook d1 is going to probably be played here, and I'm not sure what white will do about that. Anyway, he played g4. Rook c4 skewers the bishop and the pawn. King f3, rook c3 check, king g2, rook b3, no doubt wanting check, followed by a2. Well, you got to be a little bit worried about such a move as bishop d5. Well, he played bishop d5 right here. The bot calling for f5. f5, this is what I'm thinking, is answered by rook b2 check. But I probably should not push the pawn because it can be super attacked. Right now it's safe under the watchful care of my bishop. So if king f3, rook f2 check, and then king g3, and I got to move back this way somewhere, maybe d2. Anyway, bishop d5 hitting the rook was played. Rook b2 check. Yeah, the bot says come to here, hit the bishop, and then play there. I'm assuming that's what the continuation is. King f3, rook h2, hitting the h-man. King g3, f5 again. But here f5 is definitely answered by rook takes the pawn. And after here I attack the bishop. He can throw a Zwischenzug check in. Ooh. And king e8, rook a8, king d7, a little bit of dancing. You do lose this pawn, and that becomes a passed pawn. This is beginning to look even more drawish, isn't it? How about rook d4? If he hits my bishop... No, if he hits my bishop, I have a Zwischenzug. I can give check. And then defend. All right, anyway, let's go back. King g3 was played, hitting the rook. Rook d2. The eval bar really giving black the nod here, but apparently not quite enough, because after bishop c4 and rook c2, bishop d5 and bishop d6, Bobby Fischer offered the draw, and that draw was accepted. The annotator calling for rook c3. Well, I mean, it might be more hopeful as far as the computer is concerned, but I don't really see a real promising way to make good on the A-man, especially, you know, after a move like we interpose the bishop, get rid of the check, and maybe like before, you know, come here with the idea of coming here so that you can come there. Oh yeah, that might work, because that covers this square. The problem is I need to get my bishop so it's defending that square, but if I move my bishop to d4 to cover that square, then this bishop can come here to cover that square. So, anyway, I think Fischer didn't see enough promise to put in the effort. He played bishop d6, offered the draw, and the draw was accepted. Opposite colored bishops, really hard. If there's a win here, who knows where it is? I don't know. And in fact, as the bot has sat there, the eval bar has come down a little bit.